Hey, I'm here with Dr. Ian Cutress. Did I get that right?
Hey, Wendell.
I got it right.
Yeah.
I struggle because I don't. It's bad.
It's all right, you're not the only one.
It's I see things in pictures in my head and then I have to translate it into words, and so I get it wrong all the time, like nanoseconds and milliseconds, and I see it, but I don't say it.
Wind and wind.
Yeah, no, tomato. It's not even. It's more complicated than that. It's actually kind of scary. So we're at the end of the, I don't know, AMD E3 press event, which is technically before E3,
Yeah.
but after Computex.
Yeah, they decided to fly a bunch of us out here for a tech day. And AMD tech days are pretty good. They like to go and deep dive into their products, and AMD's products this year.
There's a lot.
It's a lot with very little competition. That's the weird thing. Last year, I remember having to review 5 different platforms in the first half of the year, and then another 2 or 3 by the end of the year. This year, there's only 1 or 2, but they're all AMD.
Now, I remember clearly from the Intel press event that something new high-end desktop processors are coming at the end of 2019, but it was like one line in the entire presentation.
Oh yeah, new Core X.
Yeah.
Which is, I would assume, Cascade Lake X for.
Maybe. Was that the Xeon W that already came out with the Apple? Was that what they were talking about?
No idea. Yeah. Magic 8-Ball says, ask again tomorrow.
It was the first time that we saw, so Intel is going to do the 9900 KS. It's 5 gigahertz all core out of the box.
How much of your life do you not want at 5 gigahertz?
Have we become those people?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. If that's the best they got. I got some bad news for them. They must not have heard about multi-core enhancement that literally every board partner offers some variation of.
Well, so the difference here is that it's in spec, right? Intel has this in spec definition. If you as long as you don't change the overclock bit, you're still in spec and you can get warranty.
What's in spec depends on who you're talking to from Intel. A lot.
So I actually had an interview with the Intel guy who has helped redefine TDP and turbo for the new era, and he clarified what in spec and out of spec is. I need to transcribe that interview and I'll post it on an Antec. But he was very clear in defining what in spec and out of spec was. But yes, no, if you talk to different people at Intel, they will give you different answers. But I finally have a definitive answer from the guy who matters.
Well, from the peanut stand or the peanut gallery where I am, it just looks like there's a level of panic in Intel's outward messaging that I have not seen since the Athlon X2 days.
It's weird how you can position yourself in different ways to see it from different angles. From some angles, it seems like panic. From other angles, it's, well, what else can they do, right? If you were in that position, would you be doing the same thing? And probably yes. But they are extracting more out of 14 nanometer plus.
If I were in Intel's position, I would probably jettison X299, move everything to 3647, and then keep the 115X socket variant for like 8 to 10 cores, and basically call it a day.
Yeah, I mean that would help simplify their products line. I mean, also having the same socket but different chipset support.
Yeah.
Yeah, and changing their product categories based on that. Yeah, it makes it more difficult for people to understand. But
well, I'm just looking at like on the server side. When AMD did their press event with like the protein folding thing, they were like, no, you need to compare to the Platinum 8280, which is like 400 to 500 watts, from what I understand on the OEM side.
So this was a funny discussion because I acted as a sort of like go-between between AMD and Intel on this.
No, I'm the prettiest. So
to clarify, AMD showed an AMD protein folding with the new 64 Rome dual socket server versus Intel 8280 26 core dual socket, 28 core, sorry. And it showed 20 nanoseconds versus 10. Now, Intel said...
They're favoring AMD.
Yeah, favoring AMD. Intel said, you're not using the right optimizations, to which AMD said, we're using the latest public optimizations. This is thinly veiled saying, well, if you got something better, then tell it. And then they said, well, you're not using the Platinum 9282, which is their sort of dual die 56 core BGA only 400 watt monster. You're not using two of those, so you have more core parity, so dual 56 core versus dual 64 core. And to which AMD replied saying, well, we would have loved to have used them, but we can't buy them. And Intel said, well, they'll be ramping through the second half of the year. To which AMD's response is, I still can't buy them. And then, that we didn't even get into the argument of, well, price difference. What's the price of Intel's 400-watt CPU versus 64-core ROM? And
well,
it was an interesting dynamic in how each of these companies want to represent their product in the best light. And again, do you come from the point of, well, should they be fair, or should they be doing their product in the best light, or are they just doing what they have with what? I mean, it's marketing trying to do what the best with what manufacturing is giving them, right?
So the 56-core benchmark, even with all of that, the striking thing about that for me was that the margins by which Intel took the performance crown there were thinner than a gnat's ear.
Is what, 23 to 20?
Yeah, I mean, it was just a shockingly small number that probably you could eke out with more optimizations, especially if they had non-public optimizations on the one side.
Yeah.
Also, did that have the meltdown inspector mitigations?
Intel specifically states that any benchmark number that they showcase may not have all security updates enabled.
Neat.
So that's not to say they might not have, but they might not have. AMD does the same thing, right? I mean, we saw this week at this event at the AMD Tech Day that they were showcasing Intel not with the latest security optimizations against AMD with the latest OS updates.
Which is the best possible case for both people. Except for AMD did not have the scheduler update.
Right.
Because they needed it's in the fast ring. Well, they told me that it's in the fast ring and you don't need a chipset driver, because that's why I got an anomalous result on one of my tests. But for 1903, you do need a chipset driver to enable the thing to make the scheduler aware of the compute complexes. So that would put AMD at a slight disadvantage there.
It's I'm just waiting to get the hardware on hand.
Yeah.
I mean, first party benchmarks, wait until the rest of us test it, I think.
I think that this also, like, AMD has not done a lot of press events over the last 10 years, or a lot of benchmarking and things like that, but at least outward appearances are that they are trying to be as forthright as possible, while also, of course, putting the best foot forward. There's no substitute for, proper benchmarking.
I've noticed with both AMD and Intel, and credit to both of them, to be honest. So AMD hired Scott Wasson from the Tech Report, and a load of people know Robert Halleck. He used to be in the press. And Intel have hired, Ryan Shrow. And
he debuted the 9900KS.
Yeah, but what we're seeing in these events is they're being more thorough with their data presentation, because they're giving journalists who know how to present this data to present it to journalists, right? Which to me is a great thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember once Razer launched the first Razer smartphone, and in their presentation they gave all the really intricate benchmarks that an Antec does. Well, that's because a former Antec employee helped them with their benchmark. And, we're now seeing that in the sort of x86 space, and as a result, we're getting such a wider dynamic range of
It is
benchmarks.
Really interesting. 2019 is going to be 2019 into 2020 is going to be an interesting time for processors.
Not only consumer, but also enterprise.
Yeah. Well, and, at the Computex side of things, not just the recent AMD event, we're at the Beverly Hilton right now on the 8th floor.
The Hollywood sign is just over there.
Yeah, we tried. There's the exposure. We don't have any lights. I don't know. It's fine. But at Computex, it was kind of electric for AMD. It was honestly kind of surprising, because all of the board partners were super ramped. Asus has got 20 SKUs.
30.
30? Gigabyte has like 6 or 8 main SKUs.
Yeah.
And ASRock's got 10, and
I think the official number was 56 altogether, right?
Yeah.
56 X570. So that's not even including the B550 boards, which we assume are coming in a couple of months.
Yeah.
Right. So everything on the X570 platform, anywhere from say $120 all the way up to $1,000. I mean, ASRock X570 Aqua, with that full water block cover.
That's a nice board, nice looking board.
A lot of effort has gone into these motherboards, and you can tell because that's where the revenue for these companies is coming from for the rest of the year, right? I hate to say it, but it's true. We're in a situation where AMD is now becoming a lot more competitive, if equal with better power in some circumstances, if you believe what AMD is telling us. In combination with Intel having issues meeting demand on the server side, and that's having a knock-on issues with supply on the consumer side.
They keep saying that they've got the supply issues under control and it'll be ramping in next quarter, but I've been hearing that for at least 3 quarters.
So I believe they said in the last earnings call that they will be ready to meet demand and supply by Q4.
Is that because no one is going to be demanding them anymore? Buzzing!
Well, hang on. If they keep having security issues that knock on performance, people are going to buy more processors. I mean, one of the reasons why Intel is having such high demand of the server stuff is, well, overnight 30% of the performance decreased in database workloads and stuff. So, how do you get 30% performance back? You buy 30% more servers.
So, kind of related to that. I mean, I hate giving Intel a hard time because they are like a $40 billion plus organization on like the R&D and the fabrication and all of that. And we heard from AMD engineers at this event that they really didn't expect any kind of. They actually expected a clock frequency regression with 7 nanometers because the wires are so small that resistance increases. It's a generally accepted engineering thing that your performance is going to regress. And we see that with Cascade. We see that with the laptop parts. I mean, it's a 1 gigahertz regression in laptop parts.
I remember when the first 14 nanometer laptop parts came out, the integrated graphics clocked at about 200-300 megahertz lower than what people were expecting. Intel eventually got that back up over the next 2-3 generations, but still, it's great. You get a new process node, gives you more power budget to do more things to increase IPC, but then you lose potential frequency at the high end.
Yeah, there's just too much leakage, or whatever the electrical effect is. You get heating when you should not because the resistance is higher. And I think because it sounded to me like because that was an accepted engineering thing, it's like, well, we're Intel, we put so much into it, this is going to be a thing that everybody is going to suffer from. And the champs at TSMC, if you're to believe, AMD, it's like, gosh darn it, those plucky little guys figured it out, and everything is amazing. And so they were able to claw back a lot of the clock frequencies.
I mean, this is the dynamic in the industry, right? When Intel has a new performance node, a new process node, they're the ones that are first to try it out because it's their node. When TSMC has a new node, like 7 nanometer, then all the smartphone guys jump on it first. Yeah. They're all doing the small sort of like 70, 80 square millimeter dies, and they get to iron out the process. And then AMD comes along with an 80 square millimeter die saying, hey, we want to use high performance libraries at 4 point whatever gigahertz. And TSMC goes, well, okay, great. Let's do that. It out. Yeah.
It is a really interesting dynamic and a really interesting situation because even like if you look at like the liquid nitrogen overclocking, like the super overclocking, back on 28 nanometers, like 6.5, 7 gigahertz.
Yep.
Okay. And now we saw firsthand at this AMD event 5.375 on the 16 core all core, and it's like 5.375. That's not 6 or 7 gigahertz.
Yeah.
But it's also 7 nanometers versus 28.
Yeah. I mean, well, what's the world record now? 8.838 gigahertz by Andre Yang, and he did that on an FX 8150. I want to. Yeah. So this is generations ago.
I'd rather have the 16 core 3950X at 4 gigahertz than a completely stable FX 8150 or whatever
at any frequency.
Yeah.
Well, that's AMD's past. AMD's future looks bright by comparison.
Yeah, it really does. What other interesting stuff? We had, let's see, I'm trying to remember. We did this once before and there was a memory card mishap. And I'm trying to remember, because we had some other interesting things that we chatted about.
So one of the things we learned this week, which we weren't aware of, is the relationship between the I/O dies inside the CPU and the chipset.
Oh, yeah.
Right, so we've known about the server side of Zen 2 and the massive I/O die that's built on Global Foundries 14 nanometer. helping go through the wafers as part of AMD's supply agreement with Global
Well,
Foundries.
14/12.
Yeah,
That's a whole other story.
that's a whole other story. But that chipset is 14. Now, the chipset in the Ryzen 3000 series is a cut-down version, but that's actually built on 12 nanometer, right? So that's, again, part of the agreement, and 12 nanometer means, lower voltage, the saving power and whatnot. But the X570 chipset is actually the 14 nanometer version of that small I/O die.
Yeah.
So it's the same floor plan, just built with slightly different design rules. So, it's voltage goes up slightly, but on a chipset, because it's exactly the same floor plan, you don't need memory controllers, so you can turn those off. And there's lots of other little chicken bits that you can turn off. But so what I tweeted this morning, actually, was that chipset we've been told is, 15 watts, 11 watts, depending on what configuration it's in. That means that inside the Matisse die is a 10 to 15 watt I/O die.
Yeah.
Inside the Matisse chip. So that means that the cores have got 10 to 15 watts less than the TDP of the chip to work with, which means that 7 nanometer is more efficient than we thought.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very astute observation, and the PCI Express interface. The other thing that I think that is an interesting takeaway is that the PCI Express 4 interface truly is just packet data switching, no matter what sort of peripheral you've got plugged into it, because SATA and USB and PCI Express, now it kind of makes sense, because we saw the diagrams where it's like, if you want 8 PCI Express 4.0 lanes from the chipset, fine, or 8 SATA interfaces, fine, or more USB, fine, and it's basically a one-to-one relationship. The whole point of the chipset is really to just
be a switch.
Yeah, put data on the fabric and done.
Yeah.
But that also means that you could theoretically run a PCI Express 3.0 by 8 device on a PCI Express 4.0 by 4 link with no loss of performance.
Yeah, assuming it does the conversion and acts like a normal PCI switch, yeah.
That, I think, was it Asus with their workstation board that had the 3x8?
The X570 WS Ace?
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
That explains that board.
By 8 by 8 by 8. So the first two from the CPU and then the last one by the chipset. Yeah, I remember seeing that board and thinking, how are they doing that? You can't get more than 4 by a chipset. But it turns out, based on the chipset diagrams we learned of yesterday, that yes, you can, because that's the 15 watt version of the chipset, which we assume is going to go into all the Threadripper boards as well. Yeah. When Threadripper Ryzen 3rd Gen Zen 2
seems likely
comes out. Yeah.
I think that they probably would have done a PCI Express 4.0 by 8 interface, and with the PCI Express 4.0 by 8 interface between the chipset and the CPU, you can do a lot more. You can run all of your NVMe off of that, plus all of your other peripherals, and have a lot more flexibility in terms of board design, but it probably would cost more.
So the fact that they're using essentially the same floor plan for the I/O die and the chipset could mean that in the future that becomes a configurable option for motherboard vendors. So instead of using the by 4 link from CPU to chipset, they can instead use the by 8 link and sacrifice maybe the NVMe lanes from the CPU in order to do so. Now that would be amazing.
Yeah.
That really would, and that opens up a wide range of possibilities that is essentially born from this sort of chiplet and reusable chiplet architecture.
Yeah.
Something which Intel doesn't have.
They're still stuck on PCI Express 3.0 by 4, which is looking increasingly paltry by comparison. I mean, you can saturate that with just a couple of 10 gig USB devices and your NVMe.
So the benefit that Intel has there is that their chipsets, Z170, Z270, Z370, Z390, they are essentially big PCI switches. I mean, they have what's called HSIO lanes, up to 24, I think it's 28 now. And it will say, well, these are all essentially PCIe, but some of them can be used for Ethernet, some of them can be used for USB 3.1 Gen 2 or 3.2 Gen 2. And yeah, so you can mix and match with the controllers. Intel definitely has an advantage there.
Yeah.
But they've had time to work on it and put more money into it than AMD has.
Well, I even still see the same kind of an interface at the Xeon level, which is perhaps a bit disconcerting for being able to turn on a dime and do something a little more creative. Although I guess you've got the PCI interface, and they've added 64 lanes at the very top end for the workstation. For the new Xeon W.
I think so. That part interests me because it's the same silicon as the Xeon Cascade Lake Xeon Scalables. But the Cascade Lake Xeon Scalables have 48 PCIe lanes. Mm-hmm. These have 64, but it's the same silicon. And the reason why that is because the design actually does have 64. But ultimately, originally 16 was meant to be dedicated for OmniPath. Back when they used to put OmniPath on the package. Now they've been able to reroute those through pins that already existed. So it makes you wonder how many of those pins
Thanks,
that
Apple.
aren't doing anything. So is this an Apple-driven innovation, or is this something where AMD's come along and said, well, yeah, hey, we've got 128. They need to compete. Speaking of all those PCIe lanes, I'm not sure if you saw it at Computex, but we saw an AMD system that was using the Intel Ruler SSD form factor in a 2U with 108 drives.
That's the petabyte 1U or 2U server?
Well, it's just the fact that it's AMD using all those PCIe lanes
with Intel's form factor. They're
Intel's
just like,
form factor.
no, how do we make this stop?
I mean, ultimately it means that those drives are less hampered by the PCIe bandwidth upstream.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately you're not going to be RAID zeroing them for peak bandwidth.
Software-defined storage.
Yeah, but that's how it goes.
You'd be surprised how many people are not thinking in terms of redundancy instead of a single server anymore. A lot of the moves that I saw at Computex for servers are that people really don't care anymore. It's like, I've got a full rack. Look, if I lose half the rack, the software redundancy is going to take care of it. So I don't care about any inter-machine redundancy at all, as long as I've not got somebody that comes to this rack every day to deal with a hardware failure.
And Google's got that live migration feature for Google Cloud, and that's really amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, any software stack worth its salt is just swarms and swarms of relatively tiny VMs. And that on Epic First Gen, that was actually a better use case than large monolithic VMs. It's just a swarm of small VMs, because then you don't have to worry about coherency and cache, cross-socket cache coherency and this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And then we get a situation where competing vendors aren't saying, well, you've only got an 8-core die, what if you have a 10-core VM sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
Which was part of the dialogue we had last year and the year before.
Yeah. I don't think that's going to be a concern anymore.
No. So speaking of server CPUs, even though it's not related to the event while we're here in LA, but back in Computex, we saw a system with the new Chinese EPYC.
Yeah, the Hygon Zen 1 die licensed thing.
Yeah.
That was interesting. You got a closer look at that than I did. You got to find out some of the internals. You were mentioning about the encryption system?
Yeah, so what happened is AMD and THATIC, which is like a research arm of the Chinese government, that's a very high-level definition. They formed a joint venture with 49% ownership, because if you want to work in China, that's the sort of thing you have to do. And they transferred the license of the Zen 1 core basically to this joint venture, and the joint venture designed an EPYC-like system. Now, that joint venture can change parts of the core. So it's not an architectural license. It's like a core license with approved modifications.
You can copy paste and change a little bit.
Yeah, but those changes have to be approved by AMD, which is something I learned recently. So what they've done is they've taken out the American encryption engines and put in the Chinese ones.
Makes sense.
It's they just have different algorithms for doing crypto. And that's one change. We've been told that there are other changes, but AMD won't tell us what they are. They said we're going to have to get a chip and to probe them. And if we find any, we can ask AMD and they may confirm them, which is going to be fun.
Anybody have any of those in the audience? Let us know. Because we kind of, I need the data.
It's, do you follow InstLatex64 on Twitter? He's a guy that basically does all the instruction latencies and throughputs
for
every processor. And that when he gets hold of a new chip, so when I did the 10 nanometer Cannon Lake review earlier this year,
so long ago.
he worked with me. I worked with him. He worked with me on that to find out what some of the differences in the Cannon Lake microarchitecture are. And to be honest, there are a few things that are in that which aren't in Ice Lake.
That's surprising.
It's because Intel seems to have bifurcated and then cut one of its product strategy. I don't know.
So, I mean, I think that there was a shuffling of talent and production at Intel, and some things were lost or are in the process of migration. That's probably a fair assessment.
It's you know, I had a conversation with Intel engineers a few years ago, and I said, are we at a single thread performance wall? You know, which is kind of, I knew the answer. The answer is no. But I just wanted to hear what their response was. And they said, you know, well, give us a couple of years and we'll give you 20% IPC.
18%.
But
not bad.
But this was
clock regression.
Well, so this was a few years before. So we eventually got that. But,
just now, like 5 minutes ago, literally.
But that's because Sunny Cove on the new 10 nanometer was delayed because it was tied to process.
Yeah.
So Intel's new strategy under their new CTO, Dr. Murthy Rendutin-Chawla, has said we're going to disaggregate microarchitecture to process. So they're going to work on the best microarchitecture possible and then implement it on the best process available at the time, which is what you should do when you're a company the size of Intel. And that's the effect that complacency has had on Intel over the last 10 years. If they were competing like for like every year for the last 10 years, this would have been implemented
forever
out the
ago.
gate. Yeah.
Chiplets probably would have been implemented forever ago too. I mean, chiplets are, you have to do that in order to get the yields that you need to be profitable.
Especially on the new process nodes, yeah. And so speaking of chiplets, we're seeing more and more chiplets being, you know, kind of showcased at events now. Intel's future GPU, which is coming on 7 nanometer, they've kind of shown a, it's not a block diagram, it's an artistic representation of what they're doing.
The story behind that is really weird, because the artist did the thing before the thing, and then Intel was like, ooh, that's nice. And then it was like, here, do the thing with a little bit more knowledge. So,
but that's using chiplets interconnected with EMIB plus Foveros stacking.
Yeah.
So that's new packaging technologies with chiplets.
Yeah.
NVIDIA just showcased a paper at the VLSI conference in Kyoto, where that's their AI processor. So trying to move, you know, AI necessarily out of the general GPU and into its own dedicated, up to 128 TOPS, and that's using up to 16 chiplets as well. That's a paper I really need to like fine-tooth comb through, because that's really interesting, because that's designed to be scalable from mobile all the way up to data center.
Even this event from AMD, which, you know, was, I don't know if it was watered down, but compared to like other press events, it was much less watered down. We learned about stuff that they were doing with their packaging technology, like the organic substrate that's the carrier for their chiplet, and the manufacturing tolerances and things like that went into it. It's getting kind of scary in terms of like manufacturing repeatability. And
what did they say? There are only 2 fabs in the world that have the capability and the technology to do micro bumps for 7 nanometer the way they needed them.
Yeah.
2 in the world.
Yeah, and it sounded like they coached one of them a lot on being able to get usable substrates.
Yeah.
So
they've had to increase the package substrate from 10, 12 layers to 14 layers because the PCIe 4 signaling, that sort of thing.
And the micro bump diameter is down to 150 micrometers from 180 or something like that?
It's 150 to 130.
150 to 130, wow.
And the way they're enabling that is, instead of just using the solder, or the tin silver solder balls, is by using epitaxial growth for copper pillars. Yes, I'm putting my chemistry degree to good use.
They're literally growing copper.
Yeah. But you got to do what you got to do. Makes me sound like a mid-20th century communist. You got to do what you got to do, but it's true. You know.
It's an exciting time in the micro. Like most people, it's like, I just want to play my games faster. They don't understand the level of insanity that has gone into stuff here. And we met a lot of the engineering team. I mean, AMD's a relatively, you know, I think you joked is like, not everybody should take the same return flight. Relatively small, huge Fortune 500 company. Yeah. And it was really interesting to see the heart of so many people. Like, it's so easy to tell, like Mike Clark and Scott Watson and so many of the other guys that have poured so much of themselves into these products. And they've really, you know, regardless of how the market receives it, they've really done an incredible job for the relative, you know, David versus Goliath type situation we find ourselves in terms of engineering and fabrication. Well,
so this is one of the things that I've learned over the 10 years I've been in, you know, journalism. It's, from the outside, everything's a black box. You just buy the part on the shelf. Maybe you go into forums and speak about it, but you just buy a product on the shelf. I've been spending the last few years, trying to pull back the curtain on these black box companies. There are people there that are emotionally invested and technologically invested in what they're doing day to day. Now, AMD has 10,000 employees, right? They have, what do they say, 6 corporate fellows, of which 4 of them were on the stage, the presentation a couple of days ago. Speaking about how they manage their teams and how ideas come to fruition. And these fellows are special. One of them is Joe Macri, who's essentially the father of GDDR6. But there's not only Intel, not only AMD. Intel's the same.
Yeah.
Qualcomm's the same. Or even OEM partners, Supermicro, MSI, Asus, Gigabyte. It's not only do they have the engineers who it's their job, they have the engineers who it's their passion.
Yeah.
And that's part of the industry I didn't see from the other side.
Yeah, if my Twitter is anything to be believed, even after people leave Intel or are forced out of Intel, I don't know which, they're still super passionate about Intel.
Yeah.
And you see that across all of the industry. But then you can't help but think if there's some disconnect between what the company is doing and what the engineers want to do. Because like the Tage branch predictor, that was a great story. The corporate fellows had a story about how that was technically something, I guess, for Zen 3 or something.
Yeah.
And so it was like, no, we think we can get the branch predictor in Zen 2. And it's like, all right, let's give it a shot.
Yeah, let's work our asses off. Yeah.
Woo! So, yeah, twice as much work and half as much time. Yeah.
But hey, if it works, it works.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting 2019 one way or the other for AMD. Is there anything else you can think of? Anything else that our podcast viewers / listeners would?
Right. So out of all the news we posted yesterday that came out of AMD, the one that got the most traction was the price of the 16 core.
Yeah.
Right, $749. Now, we knew it was coming, but they didn't tell us the price before the press event. Now I was thinking, what would be a good price for that? And I was thinking, $799 people would be happy with, and there'd be relatively no complaints. If they did $899, it would probably still be all right, but there would be complaints. $749, and the 12 core is what, $499?
Yeah.
So you're paying an extra 50% for 4 more cores. And it's got a higher frequency, and it comes with the nice 125 watt raised spire cooler. Yeah, that's suddenly Intel's high-end desktop market. It kind of does make it sound like we're bashing on Intel as we're talking.
Listen, I bought a 7900X with my own money, and the value, that's a $1,000 processor. Whenever it came out, I bought it on launch day because it was like 10 cores on the high-end desktop socket. This is going to be great.
You mean you didn't buy the $1,700 one?
No, I didn't buy the $1,700 one. And I was really excited about that processor for the large cache and the new process in X299 and all this kind of stuff. Its value has tanked. Like usually Intel processors hold their value pretty good. Yeah. It's worth about $300 on the used market. And it's just because it's 10 cores, it's just not that good.
Yeah.
The 8 core, the 9900K is faster out of the box.
One of the things AMD said, and I've heard her say it before at Computex, is AMD said that Zen 2 was built to intersect a very competitive 10 nanometer desktop part from Intel, right? And Intel isn't there. They've stalled. AMD doesn't care. They're still going to come out with their best part. They're still going to put their best foot forward, regardless of what the competition is doing. They're not going to play tit for tat when it comes to saying, oh well, is this feature better, or is this feature better, or just slowly incrementing in performance, trying to milk the most out of users. They just want to put their high end one in as possible, still validated and making business sense.
Yeah.
And they said you see amazing things on the 16 core, driving that into the market. Wait for Threadripper; it's going to blow your socks off.
I can't wait. Threadripper is going to be amazing. I mean, I'm already running the 2990. I can run a Windows VM with the 2990 under Linux as UMA and basically claw back the performance that's lost from applications that don't handle that correctly, or the part of the operating system that doesn't handle that correctly. And with the I/O die, that's legit not a problem. Just seeing the I/O die in a quad channel configuration and their reported numbers on latency are honestly very impressive. Like, given that the chain, the memory, and the chiplet...
You're adding another hop.
Yeah. You're so far removed, and the signal propagation delay, and I mean, like a mesh or a ring type network for direct access to memory is going to be very, very fast. But the numbers that they had on the slides were very impressive for this change. And with the larger caches, it may not really matter for 99% of workloads.
Yeah, it's what my interest is going to be is comparing the Rome's the Epic server stuff to the Threadripper equivalents, right? In terms of frequency, about are they going to play for maybe a higher TDP on the workstation Threadripper stuff? Funnily enough, AMD has a new workstation part to their website now, and they're actually hiring for a new head of workstation products.
Excellent.
Which is Threadripper. So it very much looks like Threadripper is going to be, previously it was kind of that kind of gaming content creation mix. They're going to pivot all the way to content creation.
That's the thing that's blown my mind about the 2990 is pretty much since launch day, I've had that on in a Linux machine, just crunching numbers, doing computation, dev stuff, running integration
Bitcoin
tests and things like that, running stuff like that. And I opened it up because I wanted to see how long-term stable it was, and it's been running at about 325 watts to 350 watts on the overclock, which is really just PBO with the restrictions removed. And as long as the temperature is managed, it's using like 325 to 350 watts. So we're talking about 3.9 to 4 gigahertz on all the cores all the time, and it has been rock solid. Now, granted, I'm using error correcting memory, but it has been rock solid stable. I've only had like 2 or 3 corrected ECC events over the last almost a year.
Yeah.
So that is
how much memory do you have in it?
128 gig.
Okay, yeah.
So it's running 2666 too, which is
I think
really
that's better than average for you rate as well.
Yeah.
It's if AMD say come out with a Threadripper with 48 cores. Go. So that's 6 on each CCX for each of the 8 dice. And you can PBO to 4 gigahertz.
Yeah. That's going to be really exciting for a lot of reasons. And it's like, if the system's not super busy and I can get like 4.5 on, say, 8 cores, I'm going to be so happy.
Now, so the flip side is, we know AMD is coming out with this, right?
Yeah.
Intel's contra to that, is they're starting doing new things with packaging with Lakefield, with the Foveros chip stacking technology, and they've got EMIB. And even though we haven't seen EMIB in like a dual high-powered design, we no doubt it's going to come.
We've seen a couple of things with silicon photonics that might only be 2 generations away.
Yeah, Intel will have an answer to this. Of that, there is no doubt. Right, it's for a company that spends more on R&D in a quarter than AMD makes revenue in a year.
While the sun's out, make hay.
Yeah. AMD is going to reap the benefits, and the Epic Rome stuff is going to be at the core of that. That's going to really drive revenue there, and that's really great for AMD as an opportunity to invest more money into not only the CPU but also the GPU stuff, which, to be honest, needs some investment in. I know we haven't spoken necessarily about Navi now.
Yeah,
but
Navi. We forgot. Oh my gosh, there's Navi now too. We can talk about that.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, principles for Navi are solid.
Yeah.
It's just a combination of execution, process node, and
everybody's going to get the details about Navi wrong because of GCN, and it's got some GCN bits, but RDNA really is fundamentally different, and that was something AMD was keen to underscore and point out. They're like, we've got new ISA documentation coming out, and we've got it's totally new hardware implementation. So
yeah,
it's a weird situation.
The concept of the compute unit is different as well. Yeah. To be honest, given everything that they said, I reckon that RDNA is sort of like the trial run. Navi is the trial run for RDNA.
Yeah.
But it's RDNA 2. Yeah. It's like with AMD with the CPU stuff. Naples was the trial run. Rome is where the cash money is. It's where all the cash is, anyway.
Yeah, well, I think that they're going to have a license to print money with Rome, especially in the second half of this year, because there are a lot of data centers that are hanging on to those like V2, V3, V4 Xeons that are overdue for an upgrade. Yeah. And Rome, in terms of both legacy consolidation and new projects, is going to make a lot of sense for the enterprise.
I guess we should mention that Zen 2 also comes with an enhanced QoS.
Yeah. Oh, for
instructions.
virtual machines.
Yeah, so one of the things that Intel introduced back in Broadwell is that you can get your VMs or your containers and you can allocate specific amounts of L3 or memory bandwidth. So the concept of noisy neighbor in a cloud environment is real. You don't want somebody who's in the VM next to you hogging up all your resources. So Intel implemented that with Broadwell E, I think. This idea of at the hypervisor level being able to control how much cache and how much memory bandwidth. And now AMD has that with Zen 2.
Yep.
And that's going to be a big kicker
I'm looking forward to
deployments.
actually testing that. They also mentioned changes to like the TLB, and that will have implications for some of like the game machine virtualization stuff that I'm doing. So I really want to test that.
So it given that these features exist, it makes me want to test different amounts of L3.
Yeah.
So I mean, AMD's promoting that double the L3 has good knock-on performance for gaming and the consumer stuff. Going from 2 meg per core to 4 meg per core. But I kind of want to do a scaling article where it's just comparing how much that actually affects it. So
yeah, that'll be an interesting thing to test.
But it's glad that these actually exist. We've been told that they gave us 3 cache families of instructions that they've included in Zen 2, but we were told by Mike Clark, the father of Zen, the godfather. I beat him at bowling last night, finally. But he said, we actually have a lot more instructions included that aren't related to cache, which will be given at Hot Chips. The Hot Chips conference, which I'll be at in August. Will you be at Hot Chips?
Probably not.
That's a shame.
Maybe. August is a long way away. I wasn't planning on it, but
Hot Chips is going to be one of the most exciting conferences this year. If you're into the technical side of all these chips, they're going to go through
all of the changes.
It's not only Zen, but we're going to see Cascade Lake. We're going to see Intel's joint venture in China. That side, that's called Gintide. There's wafer scale machine learning.
Yeah.
So you have your machine learning chips that are tiny. Imagine doing it on the size of a wafer. I mean, it depends what size wafer you want. But that's new technology that's coming through. At the same conference last year, we saw nanotube-based DRAM, and that's being deployed in Fujitsu systems now.
The MIT team just released public details of their carbon nanotube-based SRAM circuit, 16 kilobytes, and it's SRAM, and it seems to be it's a wafer scale.
I saw David Shaw from Wikichip. He was posting photos of the chip. He said he managed to get hold of it, and then he did a Linus and dropped it. David. But anyway.
No. Yeah. So it's exciting. There's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot that we could probably discuss on a future thing. So if you like this, you should probably update it or share it or something. I don't know. So it's good. Well, thanks again for joining me. Or wait, is it? Well, you're going to post it, and I'm going to post it too. So it's fine.
Cheers, Wendell.
Cheers. Yes, I like cheers.
Cheers.
It's much less complicated and much less awkward. So we'll see you guys in the forum and/or on in tech.
Potato.
See ya.